Hi everyone, and welcome to my presentation, Why Sellers Don't Use Marketing-Generated Content and What to Do About It. I'm from the UK. Unfortunately, my German isn't very strong, so hopefully this will all make sense to you guys. My name's Richard Smith. I'm the VP of Sales for EMEA for Allego. I'm also with my colleagues Sarah and Chris. We're just outside if you want to come and chat to us after this presentation. Very, very briefly, for those of you who don't know who Allego is, we're a full suite sales enablement platform. What does that mean? Well, we do everything from help companies train and onboard their sellers into the business. We help them launch new products and new messaging in their sales team. We help their sales leaders do higher impact coaching with their sellers. We help them engage their buyers with virtual selling, and we also help them with their content challenges. And that really speaks to some of the topics I'm going to talk to you guys about today. And a little question just to start things off, and hopefully I don't offend any marketers in the audience, but please raise your hand if you feel completely satisfied with the content that your marketing teams create for the sales team. Raise your hands if you feel completely satisfied with the content that your marketing teams create. Okay. Interesting. Well, it kind of backs up this statistic that we've got here, that we've got a very interesting dynamic playing out, because from our own research, we found that 60% of sellers and buyers complain that they don't have access to the content that they need, whether that's content to share with customers, to use in the sales process, or to use as part of their research. On the flip side, we know that 70% of content created by the marketing team for the sales team is never actually used. So there's this big contrast between what sellers and buyers are saying and what's actually being used by the team. And we've been talking about this misalignment between sales and marketing for a long time, and it's definitely at play here when we talk about sales content. So why does this big paradox exist? Well, traditionally, we found that it's down to two main reasons. The first one is that content typically is very difficult for sellers to find. We've heard many sales teams tell us, I spend more time trying to find the latest slide deck or the latest case studies than actually using it. This content typically exists in 100 different locations in the business, and people just simply can't find what they need, and they get frustrated with that. The second challenge that they share with us is that they can find the content, but the problem is that the sales team just don't find the content very useful, which is probably a bigger problem, because modern sales content platforms like Allego have gone a really long way to solve the first problem. They become a source of truth to have all of your content accessible for the sales team. But despite many companies having some kind of sales content management platform in place, sellers still aren't using the content. And why is this? Well, simply put, salespeople aren't confident at using that content effectively when they're actually selling to customers. So how do we solve this big problem? Well, it really comes down to having a sales content lifecycle. And this is kind of what it looks like. And the key message here is that the creation of sales content never actually stops. It's a continuous loop. And this is where a lot of companies go wrong, is that they create the content, they distribute it, but they never actually go back to optimizing that content. But the key thing is that co-creation stage, which is the very start of the content lifecycle, needs to have sales and marketing involved in that conversation. When you have sales involved in the conversation from the very start, you're going to increase the chances of that content actually being used by the sales team. I'm going to be diving deep into each of these, how you can become really effective at each stage of this content lifecycle. We tend to find that companies are typically very good at distributing content, activating content, but it's the top two pieces that they're not particularly strong at. Okay, so firstly, co-creation. And the message that I'm sending to you today is stop doing this alone. And what we recommend is that you create a group of people in your business that's involved with co-creating content. And in this group, you could have marketers, you could have sellers, you could even have your top performing salespeople, people very well respected in the business, and also executives as well. We tend to find that when there is executive presence in this meeting, it sort of elevates the importance of the meeting. We actually find giving this group of people a name also elevates its importance. At Allego, we have what we call a sales advisory board. They meet once a month to do this exact process of creating content. And the other reason why it's important to have sales involved in this process, as well as answering the questions on screen, is that we tend to find salespeople are much closer to the customer than most people in the business. And a good example of where this becomes useful is things like the type of language or terminology that your customers use. So at Allego, we sell in part to financial services. Financial services companies don't really call their salespeople sellers or salespeople. So if you imagine the marketing team creating a slide deck for financial services where they're using words like sellers or salespeople, that's one quick way for the salespeople just to not even use that content. So just having sales present in those meetings, giving those kind of pointing in the right direction around terminology can straight away increase the chances of the sales team using that content when it's created. And we actually did a bit of a study to sort of back up our theory that why it's important to have salespeople involved in this process of creating content and rolling it out. And this was a study that we did with B2B Decision Labs. And the whole purpose of this study was to see when different people in the business introduce content to the sales team, was there a positive correlation or not in the sales team's likelihood of using that content in their sales process? So what we did is we split this group of 300 salespeople into 3 groups, and each of those groups was headed up by a different person. The first group was headed up by a sales leader. The second group was headed up by someone from marketing. And the third group was headed up by a high-performing salesperson. And each of these 3 people were going to be introducing this new piece of content to the sales team, and they were going to ask the sales team afterwards, how likely are you going to use that content once it's been introduced to you? What we actually did was go a step further by testing what happens when you introduce the content to the sales team with additional context. And the first variable was introducing the content alongside just some basic instructions of what that content is all about. The second piece of context was introducing the content but with a case study as far as looking at how you would talk about that content with a customer. And the third piece of context was introducing the content alongside a recording of a salesperson, a high-performing salesperson, talking through that slide deck with a real customer. So almost kind of seeing how a seller would actually use that content in action. And the results were fascinating. What we found is that when a high-performing salesperson introduces the content to the sales team shared that they were 61% more likely to use that content versus if it was introduced, for example, by the marketing team. And when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Because who are you most likely to trust as a seller? Is it someone in marketing, in their own silo? Or is it to the colleague who has the same conversations, has the same challenges, objections as you do when you're meeting with customers? And interestingly, the high-performing seller scored even higher than the sales leader, which again shows that the sales team actually kind of trusted in and believed in more the messaging, the performance of their colleague versus someone on a higher level than them. Let's take a deeper look at this, at the specifics of this study as it connects to the context that was delivered with the content. And you can see here that the sales team were twice as likely to use the content after watching a role-play demonstration from a high-performing salesperson talking through that content versus someone in marketing doing that. The sales team shared with us that when they can actually see and hear a top-performing salesperson that they work with demonstrate how they would talk through that slide deck with a customer, then that was really the dream scenario. That was their best chance of using that content themselves. And so the message here, when you think about how you are rolling out content to the sales team, my message to any marketers that may exist in the audience is stop doing this on your own. Partner with sales, particularly with a top performing salesperson, and make sure that when you introduce new content to the sales team, you have an example of what good looks like. For example, a recording of the top performing seller talking that content through with a customer, either a real situation or more of a role play situation. And a final study, a separate one that we did, is the effect of having different reflective activities following the content being introduced to the sales team, to basically test to see how it would influence the seller's likelihood of using the content. And when I say reflective, that would typically be like a sit-down meeting with a manager or a coach and asking questions to the salesperson about what they understand and how they would use the content. And what the study found is that when there were no reflective activities once the content had been rolled out, there was about a 2.5 score on the likelihood of the salesperson using that content. But when the manager asked the salesperson how they would use the content, in which situations and scenarios would they use it, there was a massive 98% increase on the likelihood of that salesperson using that content. So simply asking the salesperson, so, hey, tell me how you would use this content in your sales cycle or with a customer, has a massive impact on the likelihood that they're going to actually use that content. And so we've gone through the co-creation, the distribution, the activation. The third piece of the content lifecycle is the optimize piece. And so how do you go about optimizing the content once you've rolled it out to the sales team? Well, for us, it falls into three categories. And the first one is kind of what most companies do. And it's the sort of anecdotal feedback from sales. And that's typically the sort of feedback you get from salespeople informally in the office, maybe on a team meeting. The problem is with that strategy is that feedback very rarely gets recorded. It very rarely gets fed back to the marketing team. And so it actually never really ends up influencing or optimizing the content. The second way to optimize content is by using a sales content management platform such as Allego, because what we are able to do is give companies quantitative feedback about how that content's being used. We can show how much the content's being used by the salesperson and the sales team, but further than that, we can show how much specific pieces of content impact win rates on deals. Or we can even show to a sales team that, hey, you're at stage 3 in your sales cycle, you're selling to this type of company in this industry, we recommend that you share this piece of content with your customer because we know that that's got a very strong correlation with deals that we win. And the third piece is my personal favorite one, and it's really about looking at how you can mine data from real sales conversations that are taking place on the front line. One way that you can do this using conversation intelligence technology is, as a marketing team, I can not only see how my sales team are actually using this content when they're selling to a customer, but also this technology can show you what are the common pain points that customers are talking about, what are the challenges that they're experiencing, that they're sharing in sales meetings. And when you've got that real data from what the customers are saying, you can then use that to optimize the content that you're creating. And again, just make it feel much more valuable for the sales team to use. So that kind of brings me to the end of the presentation. Hopefully that gives you an idea about the reason why sales teams are reluctant to use marketing content and some fresh ideas of how you could increase the adoption of this in your own business. If you want to find out a little bit more about how Allego solved this challenge, we're just outside the theater. Come and have a chat, and we'll be happy to share some more. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. So I couldn't find any question via Slido, But I want to ask you in personal, is there any question left from your side to Richard about Allego? I wrote down maybe one question, which I find quite interesting. Maybe you too, and maybe if you have an added question, feel free to ask it afterwards. So, Richard, lots of companies, they have a huge amount of content that they have built up over the years. It is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. Do you think less is more when it comes to sales content?
Yeah, we see this problem with companies who have an enormous amount of content that they've accumulated over the years. It could be slide decks, presentations, case studies, white papers. And we do hear, our message is that you can have too much content, and a lot of the time, the content that you have accumulated, it does expire, it does go out of date. And the problem is that content is never being reviewed by the sales team. And so we tend to find that our customers, the ones who have most control over this, is they have content audits where they look at the content that's being used. They kind of limit how much is actually being used by the sales team. And because when you have too much, it becomes overwhelming. So we definitely believe that less is more when it comes to content, but you should always be looking at what content is being used the most by the sales team, what do the sales team find is most useful, and use that to help create more content like that. So yeah.
So less is more.
Absolutely.
One question from your side. No, then maybe one last thing, or even you just take one more minute to think about it. Isn't it also a possibility for sales and marketing to weld together if you have the right content, that it's really a chance that they act in another way?
Yeah, well, we've talked about sales and marketing being so separate from each other. They typically don't like each other. And so
most cases.
And so this is really a way to kind of bring those two departments together, because you stop having marketing just creating what they think is useful, and you actually bring sales into the equation, and it's a much more healthier relationship when you do it this way. And we see customers actually doing it this way creates a healthier connection and actually gets better results, because marketing are actually creating content that the sales team actually want to use and that they find useful.
Stop the battle.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Okay, there's one question left. Please just wait a second for the microphone. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. Do you know if there is any case where also salespeople are pretty much the part that also creates content? If you're taking a look at LinkedIn, for example, companies are also publishing stuff, but it is like by far not as viral as people doing it. Do you see a case where actually salespeople are actually pushing for content?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll tell a little story, because this really speaks to our belief as a company that the sales team can become the content creators, because salespeople respect other salespeople. One of the initiatives that we had in our own company that we rolled out at the start of this year was this project called Amplify Success. And the whole objective of this was to get the sales team to record basically their tips and tricks, their best practices, what's working for them. It could be everything from questions that they're asking in a sales meeting through to how to better prospect. And the sales team were basically recording 5-minute videos where they were talking through their best practices, stuff that works for them. And everybody else in the sales team could watch those videos. It became like a mini YouTube for the sales team. The statistics around how much those videos were watched versus others was humongous. The sales team wanted to hear what was working with their peers, and it's the salespeople that was generating the content. So I think this is the future. I think you're going to see more and more salespeople becoming the content creators. It's happening on LinkedIn. The problem is on LinkedIn is how do you get that content and make it evergreen? How can you let people revisit that content when they want to? And that's exactly why people are using products such as our own. So yeah.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
Answer? Yes. Okay, I think there are no more questions left, but so you have a booth here and you're
Yeah.
ready for a conversation.
Yeah, we'll see.
So feel
Coffee
free.
break.
Big applause for Richard Smith from Lego.